Today on Ag News Daily.
They know their farm, and I think, with the history of their farm behind them, and they're seeing new trends, probably maybe some new weed dynamics. They know how to handle that farm better than anybody else, and we're just there to guide them.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. It's Michelle and myself hanging out with you this week. How's Michelle doing?
Good. It's supposed to be really nice this weekend, and really good to be back outside after last weekend's snow here in Wisconsin. So what about you?
Yeah, we'll get to the weather here in a minute, but you're exactly right. I think we had 70 or maybe even 90 degree feel-like temperature swings between Monday and today. Went from below zero feel-likes to almost in the 80s today. So it should be a lot of fun for us here. But you have a new shirt on.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for Delaney. She shared her love of Ag News Daily with me, and so got some new merchandise, I guess, of Ag News Daily. So like last week, it was our 9-year anniversary of Ag News Daily. So continuing to bring the agriculture news to you all, our listeners. But
That's
also
right.
another fun thing. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you know how many Ag News Daily shirts I have?
Zero.
But I don't think I'd look as good in that cut or style of a shirt.
Oh, it's a woman's, what do you call it? V-neck.
Yeah.
Well, Tanner, did you also know that Wednesday was National Biodiesel Day?
I had no idea, but I guess I celebrated in the right way. We were burning tons of biodiesel.
Huh. Yeah, thinking about that, next week is National Ag Week. We'll touch upon that a little more, but a lot of days just to celebrate agriculture.
That's right. Well, let's get into the weather like we had talked about. As I mentioned, here in the Midwest, we're seeing temperatures rise. Compared to last week, the cold and snowy-like weather has disappeared. We will remain above normal through the end of the week as the front moves into this area this weekend. That system is expected to bring only light scattered showers and a brief cool down afterwards, but those warmer conditions will return again early next week. Another front late next week will bring additional showers, but overall precipitation totals are expected to stay on the lighter side. Recent rainfall has been improving some drought conditions, but it's not really helping the winter wheat development across the region. Despite the earlier cold snaps, we may see a resurgence in that crop. In the central and southern plains, temperatures are surging to record levels or near record levels following recent frost events, adding stress on the winter wheat in those areas. The combination of frost and heat and increasing dryness is expected to negatively impact the crop's conditions as drought continues to expand across the southwestern plains, which is going to create challenges for both wheat and those trying to get an early start on planting. Well, before we get into the news, we'll take a break for a message.
Farming comes with trade-offs. An extra pass means dinner in the cab. An early morning becomes a late night. Unnecessary restrictions turn into headaches. But when you make Enlist herbicides the foundation of your herbicide program, the trade-offs will be in your favor. Effective weed control that's ready to work when you are. Flexible tank mix options and neighbor-friendly applications, all without the need to jump through hoops. See what you'll gain with America's most trusted herbicide system protecting your Enlist E3 soybean fields at Enlist.com.
Well, Tanner, are you counting down the days until spring planting?
It feels like the countdown has too few days in it, but yes, we're ready. We're trying to be ready.
Yeah, something we share more in the upper part of our news is a fertilizer update, as the fertilizer news is really a hot topic right now. President Donald Trump's administration is working to secure alternative fertilizer supplies as the war with Iran disrupts global shipping and drives prices higher. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett stated that earlier this week on Tuesday and says the U.S. is turning to countries like Venezuela and potentially Morocco, calling it a, quote, insurance policy to help offset supply disruptions. The conflict has reduced nitrogen fertilizer shipments from the Gulf, pushing prices up more than 30% in recent weeks and adding pressure ahead of spring planting. The impact is already rippling through ag markets like we've been reporting these past few weeks, and volatility has hit corn and soybean prices while rising energy and fertilizer costs are increasing concern for farmers' bottom lines. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell says higher oil prices can feed into the broader inflation over time, raising production and transportation costs. For farmers heading into planting season, that means closely watching input costs as ongoing uncertainty in the Middle East continues to influence both profitability and risk, something we continue to mention as this is ongoing and something we are continuing to watch here at Ag News Daily.
That's right. Seen a lot of interaction on X and other social media platforms. We're also seeing a lot of interaction coming from the world's largest fertilizer companies. They're now facing a class action lawsuit, which has been accusing them of conspiring to inflate fertilizer prices for U.S. farmers. The suit's been filed by an Iowa farm last week that alleges companies, including the Mosaic Company, Nutrien, and Koch Agronomic Services, have coordinated production and pricing to drive up costs for key inputs like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. According to the filing, fertilizer prices jumped 60% between 2021 and 2022, adding an estimated $128,000 in costs per farm, while prices stayed elevated even after supply chain and geopolitical pressures had eased. At the same time, pressures building across the ag industry to bring costs down. More than 60 ag groups are urging companies like the Mosaic Company and J.R. Simplot Company to support removing U.S. duties on imported phosphate from Morocco. Those tariffs were put in place in 2020 following a petition from Mosaic that was backed by Simplot and was intended to counter the unfair foreign competition. But farm groups are now arguing the current global tensions are driving fertilizer prices even higher. So regardless of actual supply impacts, they say reducing trade barriers could help stabilize costs as we head into this growing season. So we'll see if we get any updates on those two headlines coming down the road.
I think it's interesting that it poses the question is what is the value for a farmer to put in those resources of fertilizer, and then some of those companies that are able to come in and share, okay, this is another way to put nitrogen in the soil. So really interesting to see that on social media and through their marketing efforts. But here, the Agricultural Retailers Association released its 2026 public policy priorities earlier this week, outlining a broad agenda aimed at supporting ag retailers and strengthening the nation's food and supply chain. The group says the plan focuses on practical, science-based policies to keep U.S. agriculture competitive globally. Senior Vice President Richard Gupton says the priorities are designed to protect the tools, technologies, and regulatory certainty that retailers and farmers rely on every day. The word there is certainty is what they're advocating for. Key areas including passing a new farm bill like many commodity groups, advancing modern crop technologies, and maintaining science-based pesticide regulations. The plan also highlights support for conservation programs, rural workforce development, and improvements to transportation infrastructure and energy systems. Issues the group says are critical to long-term growth and stability across the agricultural economy. Talking all about these updates, especially right before planting season here in the Midwest, let's hear a tip as we head into that growing season from Ron Geis of Corteva Agroscience for this episode's Tip with Corteva Agroscience.
The only thing that seems to be constant is change, so let's just be ready for it. Stay up to speed on your current and your long-range weather forecasts. Let's say if you plan to put corn in a certain farm and the weather delays your planting and you need to pivot to soybeans, just have a plan B already ready. If it's going to be a dry year, watch for bugs. If it turns wet, watch for diseases. So stay in touch with your ag retailer or visit us at corteva.com/US for more information and to be ready for that change.
Well, thanks for that. We will jump into more news around the financial pressures happening across the farm economy. We're now seeing 54 food and ag groups, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, urge President Donald Trump and his administration to start taking more action. In a letter to the White House sent yesterday, on Thursday, the groups point to severe weather, rising input costs, and global uncertainty as the key challenges that have been facing farmers. They say the recent disruptions and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has driven fertilizer prices up and is adding even more strain and rising concerns on the broader food supply chain. As lawmakers consider a supplemental defense spending bill, these groups are calling for additional market relief for farmers. They say support should be built on $11 billion Farmer Bridge Assistance Program and expand that to include specialty crop, sugar, and alfalfa producers, along with those that have been impacted by severe weather events. The letter also pushes for policy changes like year-round E15 and tax incentives to boost domestic demand, emphasizing that food security is national security. So it seems like a lot of uproar and a lot of folks trying to get a hold of people in office to get some changes made.
Certainly a lot of call to actions, and here's perhaps maybe some good news in the next week or two that can provide some certainty to the market, talking stronger biofuel policy support as new guidance from the Environmental Protection Agency and action on E15 moves closer, more or less in hopes for a lot of ag groups. Speaking at the University of Arkansas, USDA Deputy Secretary Stephen Baden said the agency's upcoming biofuel blending rules could be the most supportive of biofuels yet from a White House, he said. He added that the move could help build momentum in Congress to pass legislation allowing year-round sales of higher ethanol blends like E15. USDA Deputy Secretary Baden also highlighted growing opportunities in sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, made from U.S. agricultural products. He pointed to a recent agreement with Japan to purchase American SAF, which has already sparked at least one proposal for a new production facility in the United States. As early as next week Friday, we could hear some speculation.
Wow, we'll be keeping our finger on that pulse and see if we can't get you some of the latest headlines. Well, China is always in the news. This week, top U.S. and Chinese officials were reportedly remarkably stable in economic talks that happened over the weekend in Paris. The discussions covered agriculture, critical minerals, and managing trade relationships. The talks were aimed at identifying the areas of the agreement for U.S. President Trump and China's President Xi Jinping to consider at their future meeting in Beijing. Sources say that China signaled a willingness to increase purchases of U.S. agricultural products, including poultry, beef, and non-soybean row crops, while maintaining plans to buy 25 million tons of U.S. soybeans annually over the next 3 years. However, trade progress could be tied to broader global tensions. Reports indicate President Donald Trump is considering delaying this trip to China as he seeks more cooperation from Beijing in reopening that Strait of Hormuz and stabilizing the global oil markets. So I know there will be more to come on that headline.
Talking about trade and continuing on that global ag news front, the United States is launching new trade investigations that could lead to tariffs on dozens of countries as the administration looks to rebuild leverage following recent court rulings. The probes, initiated by the Office of the United States Trade Representative under Section 301, will examine concerns such as industrial overcapacity and forced labor in global supply chains. Countries potentially impacted include China, the European Union, India, Japan, South Korea, and Mexico. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says the goal is to determine whether foreign trade practices are harming American workers and industries, with potential tariffs possible by mid-2026. The move comes after courts struck down some earlier tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump under the emergency powers, prompting the administrative to pursue new legal avenues. Trade partners warn the investigations could heighten global tensions and further disrupt already strained supply chains.
Yeah, that is interesting there to follow where and what that might do to a lot of the supply, especially for those in agriculture. Taking a look at Brazil now, continuing on this global ag news front, they're on track to produce a record 6.5 billion bushels of soybeans. Those will come out of the 25-26 growing season, but their farm profitability is also taking a hit, similar to what we have for farmers here in the U.S. Lower soybean prices, higher input costs, and weak port premiums are expected to push margins to their lowest levels in nearly 20 years, leaving many farmers operating at a loss or near break even. Rising expenses, particularly for fertilizer and financing, continue to weigh heavy on the outlook for Brazilian farmers. But as a result, Brazil's long-running expansion in the soybean acreage could begin to slow down. While some relief in fertilizer costs and interest rates are anticipated coming in 26 and 27 during those seasons, but the current conditions are prompting a more cautious approach. Even with tighter margins, Brazil is expected to maintain strong export demand, especially from China, reinforcing its position as that global leader in soybean production and trade.
Well, transitioning into some animal agriculture news, striking workers took to the streets Monday this week in Greenlee, Colorado to protest JBS, marking a rare labor stoppage at a U.S. meat packing plant. The union, representing nearly 4,000 employees, says it is the first strike by American meatpacking workers in 40 years, citing wages that lag behind inflation and concerns over inadequate safety equipment. JBS maintains it has made a fair offer, but negotiations remain unresolved. The strike comes at a time of already high beef prices, reducing U.S. production capacity and putting pressure on consumers. Analysts note that tighter cattle supplies have forced processors to pay steep prices for livestock, giving JBS strong incentive to settle the dispute quickly and restore operations.
Yeah, sounds like there's even later updates on this story as union is encouraging some of their employees to potentially re-sign, especially those that need additional representation or maybe fell out of that status here, to enforce maybe that number of 4,000 employees to grow as we continue to monitor that story. We'll keep an eye on that, but staying on the animal side, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is addressing online rumors that have suggested a new animal disease is circulating in a feedlot in the Texas Panhandle. I saw that email come across, Michelle, and couldn't believe it, that we were dealing with false headlines. The group says that these claims are all false. The officials from the USDA, the Texas state agencies, and the Texas Cattle Feeders Associations have all confirmed that no such disease exists. The NCBA warns that spreading unverified information can harm cattle producers, the beef supply chain, and consumer confidence. The organization encourages relying on credible, verified sources and says it will continue to work with animal health officials to monitor legitimate concerns that protect the health and U.S. cattle health and of that of the U.S. cattle herd. So glad to see that that was false. Interesting. It had to go to the measures of making sure that everybody was aware.
Certainly. And here at Ag News Daily, we always ensure that we do have the news and we look it up and that we do our due diligence on it. But continuing on animal agriculture, looking at the dairy industry, the Dairy Checkoff program has launched a new online tool to help dairy farmers and their advisors find grants and funding opportunities for conservation and on-farm improvement, something that is many farmers are looking at to diversify their income. The funding opportunities database, available through the Dairy Conservation Navigator, brings together federal, state, and private funding programs into a single searchable platform tailored specifically to dairy operations. According to Bridget Hilsey, identifying funding programs can be one of the biggest hurdles for farmers, as deadlines, priorities, and application process that we are all well aware of vary widely. The new tool simplifies that process, making it easier for dairy producers to pursue projects that improve efficiency and sustainability. More information is available at dairyconservation.org/grants. Certainly the word sustainability, both on the producer and consumer front, is really getting that recognition and the grants opportunity. So something for our listeners to perhaps look into.
That's right. And other recognition that farmers are going to get will be Tuesday, March 24th. We're going to celebrate American agriculture because it'll be National Ag Day. The day is organized by the Agricultural Council of America. It's going to highlight farmers' contributions to national security, ensuring the nation does not have to worry about where its next meal comes from. The National Ag Day also offers a chance to share the story of agriculture, from caring for animals to the practices that produce safe and high-quality food. In Washington, D.C., Michelle, a ceremony and reception will be led by the USDA Secretary of Ag, Brooke Rollins. That will take place where all of the public is invited to attend and learn and recognize farmers across the United States.
Will you be celebrating in some kind of facet?
I think if the weather's nice, we will certainly be contributing to getting this year's crop started.
How fun. Well, here this week, we are chatting with Dr. Michael Cox from Helena Products Group, one of our many conversations from Commodity Classic, to talk about their recent herbicide launch. He helps lead the team behind corn herbicides and is always on the lookout for new ways to tackle weeds in the field. Let's hear about some of those latest innovations.
Well, we are catching up with Dr. Michael Cox, the brand manager of corn herbicides at Helena. Michael, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
With your role, before we get into it, Michael, tell us a little bit about what you do in your day-to-day.
Well, my day-to-day consists of a lot of variety, I would say. As a brand manager at Helena, we're really tasked with managing a lot of different parts of developing new brands. From R&D development and working with those guys to working with the regulatory team to the marketing team to the field sales teams. I mean, you name it, we are touching it on a daily basis. So, every day is an adventure. There's a new problem to solve and a new goal to try to achieve. It's pretty dynamic.
And you said you've been with Helena for 12 years now. What was your career like that brought you here with Helena?
Well, I started with Helena immediately after completing graduate school in 2014, actually about 6 months after I completed my PhD. And I was in the R&D role for 7 years at HPG in Memphis, and then about 4 years ago I became a brand manager. So I started being more on the managerial side of a brand instead of the development and R&D side.
And Michael, when we think about Commodity Classic, this is the place to be when it comes to rolling out new products, new ideas, and new things for growers. Helena is certainly releasing some exciting things here at Commodity Classic. Talk to us a little bit about Testament.
Yeah, so Testament is our newest that we've released. We launched it at our national meeting last fall. It is a corn and soybean herbicide. It contains 3 active ingredients or herbicide active ingredients, and they deliver 2 different modes of action, and that's very important for those growers to be able to implement a variety of modes of action into that field to make sure they tackle any resistance issues that may be out there. Testament's very flexible, so it can be applied at a burn down timing in the spring all the way through a pre-emergence timing before the crop actually emerges, and then even at a fall burn down, so a post-harvest timing, it can be applied. And having those different modes of action and strong residual herbicides that are in Testament, it gives the grower an assurance that he'll be protected throughout the season and he'll have a good strong weed barrier on that soil. So yeah, we're pretty excited about Testament and the strength it brings and also the flexibility to the grower.
Now, Michael, how many years of R&D went into development for Testament before you brought it to market last fall?
Oh, probably about 3. With Testament, it's probably about 3. They vary depending on the product and the situation. Sometimes we are able to get things commercialized maybe in 2 years. Some things may take 5 or 6. So Testament, I think, was probably average, just the situation of what it brought. Some things were easy, some things were a little more difficult. But 3 years is a pretty good timeline in today's regulatory atmosphere.
And the recent EPA registration of Sinister Nexus is also an exciting development you guys are chatting about while you're down here at Commodity Classic. Walk us through the EPA registration process and what this means now for the industry moving forward.
So the EPA registration process is it can be very timely in today's ag industry and the atmosphere there. There are definitely some pinch points with getting a product through the EPA. Just through the years and ever since COVID, there have been some setbacks, I guess you could call it, at EPA. So sometimes it's hurry up and wait. You've got to check your boxes. You've got to make sure you do your due diligence on our side of getting everything prepared and submitted to the EPA as quickly as possible. And then you just have to kind of sit and wait and let them go through their process. And everybody's submitting products, and so you're in a waiting line, and hopefully you just kind of cross your fingers and hope yours is one that comes out next. So with Sinister Nexus, we waited for a while. It's been several years since we submitted, but we're really excited about Nexus. It's a very strong pre-emergence soybean product with 3 active ingredients, and it's going to really give the growers a strong product to go into the soybean season with.
Now, Helena Product Group has a very unique approach, I would say, to R&D, innovation, the laboratory setup that you guys have. You put a lot of focus in bringing new products to market. What sets Helena apart from that perspective?
Well, I guess, we're a distributor company, as a whole, and I guess that's what really makes it different, that we have such a large R&D department and process and our own lab there in Memphis. So we're able to do, some different things, some special, unique formulations of their own tier structure, their own offering level. And you don't see that a lot with a lot of other distributor companies. We put a lot of effort, a lot of time and allocation into that process of trying to develop products that are new, that are different, that bring a special value. And so, we key in on third-party researchers, evaluating, unbiased researchers that do this every day of the week, and we send them the protocol to do that field trial, and they give us an unbiased assessment of how that product works. And if it's not better than the products we're comparing it to, then we don't go forward with it. So, we set a high bar, and if we're not achieving that high standard, then that concept, that product never goes through to commercialization. So that's kind of what makes us unique in that part of the industry.
And I think that's something certainly maybe a lot of growers don't necessarily know some of the peek behind that curtain. So appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we think then about heading into the growing season, weed control is definitely top of mind, I think, for a lot of growers as they think about weeds and disease pressure that they had last year. What's important for them to be thinking about top of mind here as we head into planting season when it comes to weed control?
Yeah, well, I would definitely think they should be considering last year and, what was good, what worked, and then what didn't work, and then maybe pivot from what didn't work, and try to, I guess, estimate what may or may not happen or predict, the weather, which that's unpredictable. But just keep in mind, they're approaching 26 from experience. They're not new in most scenarios. So I think they're equipped, mentally. They just need to know and help get a little better alignment from us, as retailers and companies, and to help them make decisions, the best decisions going into the season. But they know their farm, and I think, with the history of their farm behind them, and they're seeing new trends, probably maybe some new weed dynamics. They know how to handle that farm better than anybody else, and we're just there to guide them, to help keep them on the tracks and let them know what the options are, give them versatility in the products that we can offer them, so they can make the best decision on that farm. And hopefully it all aligns, the weather works, and cooperates with them, and we give them great products, and then they get huge ROIs. That's what we always hope. So it's always a little guessing game going into the spring and not knowing what the weather's going to bring. But, we'll give them the information and train them on new products coming down the pipeline and what we're offering today. And hopefully they can capitalize on some of those new technologies and see a nice benefit in the field.
Michael, appreciate you joining today. Is there anything else I missed that you think is important as we head into 2026?
I think we covered most of the high points. I would just say, be on the lookout for Testament and Sinister Nexus as we're going into the next season or two. And, we've got new things in the pipeline we're always working on, and hopefully those will start coming out through registration in the coming years. And, we're just always looking for the next possible product or way to help the grower and give them an edge over these tough weeds and problems they face in the field and every year. And so, just keep your eyes open, and we'll try to bring that information and those products to them as quick as possible.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Michael Cox with Helena, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, Tanner, like we have a lot of conversations that we're continuing to share here on the Ag News Daily from Commodity Classic. But what's happening in markets this week?
Yeah, it was interesting. We started off a little bit on a minor roller coaster this week as markets opened down on Monday and have kind of retraced to where they've gotten to. As we're recording this today, the U.S. farmer's been moving grain faster as global tensions in Iran pushed corn, soybean, and wheat prices higher. As just mentioned, soybean futures hit their highest levels since 2024, while corn and wheat climbed to multi-month highs themselves. This has prompted many producers to sell their crops that they have stored for this year. Major grain traders, including ADM and Bunge, report increased purchases, giving farmers a short-term boost in cash flow amid those rising cost concerns for fertilizer, fuel, and seed. Market analysts have cautioned that this rally might be temporary. Purdue University Center for Commercial Agriculture notes that corn basis remains steady across much of the Eastern Corn Belt, with a strong local bids in Indiana and Ohio, while soybean basis shows more volatility as producers adjust their demand. We're seeing competitive premiums from ethanol plants that are supporting corn cash prices in some areas, but soybean bids have remained pretty uneven. Economists are emphasizing that tracking local basis is key for your operation, as regional demand from processors in ethanol plants and exporters will create a major difference for you in your area for your cash grain price. So good to see a lot of grain moving, which is probably good to see for a lot of our listeners' pocketbooks.
Yeah, certainly. And like we've mentioned, it's warm out here in the Midwest, so I probably will see a lot more tractors in the fields. And so if you're looking for something to listen, to watch, every Friday we release this both on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts, and have daily social media clips. So like
That's
mentioned
right.
last week, can't believe it's been 9 years for Ag News Daily.
Exactly. It's fun to be a part of the ride. It's also fun to be a part of March Madness. Did you, Michelle, fill out a tournament bracket?
Yeah, I did. I had good old Wisconsin making it in the Final Four, and they blew it yesterday. So what about you? How's your bracket?
Yeah, it's not looking too bad, but I've got Iowa State probably going a lot further than I should have. But that's what a true fan does, right? That's the fun part of celebrating March Madness, is like we're going to celebrate America's farmers. So listeners, always appreciate you tuning in. Michelle, thanks for hosting with me today. But what do you say for today? Should we let them go?
Let's let them go.